Her daughter threw her out of the house. Back in the 1960s, on a quiet street lined with oak trees in a small town, lived an old woman named Sarah, who had built a life brick by brick alongside her husband. They had started with nothing, just two pairs of hands and a shared dream. Together, they had opened a small bakery that through years of tireless effort became the heart of their community. Over time, life took her beloved companion, and from that day forward, a shadow of loneliness settled over the house that had once echoed with laughter. Her only daughter, Clara, now a grown woman, lived with her along with her husband, a man named Marcus, whose ambition was as thin as his promises. Sarah no longer possessed the youthful energy to stand before the hot ovens for hours. Her joints ached with the memory of 1,000 kneaded doughs. Her breath often caught in her chest, and her days stretched into a monotonous blur. She spent her mornings sitting by the large front window, her gaze lost in the comings and goings of the town, her eyes damp with recollections of a sweeter time. Clara, who had once happily decorated cookies with sprinkles at her mother's side, had grown into a sharp-edged, impatient woman. Marcus drifted from one failed venture to another, his presence a constant, heavy weight in the house. He spent his days charting grand plans that never materialized, while Clara grew more resentful of their stagnant life. One evening, as the scent of leftover bread wafted from the kitchen, the couple's whispers cut through the silence of their room. "We can't keep living like this, Clara," Marcus hissed, his voice laced with frustration. "We're stuck." Clara looked at him, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. "I know. The solution is simple. My mother has to go. This house is ours, and we need to sell it to start our own life." And with those chilling words, they sealed Sarah's fate. The very next morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the familiar walls of her home, Sarah was woken by the jarring sounds of her world being dismantled. She was still in her nightgown when Clara entered her room, her face a mask of cold resolve. "Mother, you need to pack. We're selling the house." Sarah's heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs. "Selling? But where will I go?" Clara shrugged, avoiding her mother's pleading eyes. "You'll figure something out. We've packed a small bag for you." An hour later, Sarah stood on the sidewalk with a single suitcase containing a few changes of clothes and a framed photograph of her late husband. She watched as her daughter and son-in-law locked the door to the only home she had ever known, not even glancing back as they walked away. The betrayal was a physical ache, sharper than any pain her old bones had ever felt. But what Clara and Marcus didn't know was that Sarah was not just an old baker. She was a woman of foresight. For decades, she and her husband had lived frugally, tucking away a small portion of their earnings. Tucked securely in a secret pocket, sewn into her coat, was a bank book, a testament to a lifetime of hard work and careful saving. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Wiping her tears, Sarah walked to the bus station, her spirit, though wounded, not entirely broken. She bought a ticket to a small coastal town 100 miles away, a place she and her husband had always dreamed of retiring to. In her new town, Sarah bought a modest little cottage with a small garden. The sea air seemed to breathe new life into her tired lungs. She found a quiet joy in tending to her flowers and baking for her new neighbors, who welcomed the kind old woman with open arms. She didn't try to recreate her old bakery. Instead, she started a small venture from her own kitchen, supplying local cafes with her famous pastries and cakes. The business thrived, and soon Sarah's seaside sweets became a local legend. She hired a few employees and bought the property next door to expand her kitchen. She was no longer just surviving. She was flourishing, her days filled with purpose and the warmth of a new community. She never once reached out to her daughter, the silence between them a vast, unspoken chasm. Years passed. The coastal town grew, and so did Sarah's business. She was a respected figure, a symbol of resilience and quiet strength. Meanwhile, back in her old town, Clara and Marcus's life had unraveled. The money from the house sale, which had seemed like a fortune, was squandered within a few years on Marcus's ill-conceived business ideas. They were forced to move into a cramped apartment, their dreams turning to dust. One day, Marcus, desperate and humbled, heard from a former neighbor about a successful bakery owner in a coastal town looking for a reliable manager. The name of the business, Seaside Sweets, meant nothing to him, but the promise of a steady job was a lifeline. He traveled for the interview, his hopes pinned on this one chance. He was led into a bright, airy office overlooking the ocean. When the owner turned around in her chair, Marcus's blood ran cold. It was Sarah. She looked older, yes, but she carried an air of authority and peace he had never seen before. She was no longer the frail woman they had cast aside. She was a formidable business owner. He stammered, his face flushing with shame. "Sarah, I didn't know." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. She listened to his story of failure and desperation without a word of pity or scorn. After a long, heavy silence, she finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I need a manager, and you need a job. You can work for me." Marcus was floored, stammering his thanks. But then, Sarah added a condition, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "But you will not tell my daughter anything about this. You will not tell her where I am, or what I do. You will work here, you will send her the money she needs, but my life here remains my own. Is that understood?" Desperate, Marcus agreed immediately. He was given a small room above one of the cafes and started his new life, working for the mother-in-law he had so callously discarded. He was a good worker, diligent and efficient, perhaps driven by the guilt that gnawed at him day and night. For over a year, the arrangement held. Marcus sent money to Clara, telling her he had found a good management job with a strict boss who valued his privacy. Clara, content with the money that paid their bills, never questioned it. Her greed was sated by the comfort the money provided, and she felt no need to dig deeper. She never once asked Marcus how her mother was, assuming the old woman had likely passed away in some forgotten corner of the world. Her lack of curiosity was, in itself, the final, cutting betrayal. But secrets, like rise and go, cannot be contained forever. Clara grew bored and decided she wanted to see the fancy coastal town where her husband worked. She planned a surprise visit, imagining a romantic weekend. When she arrived at the address of the main bakery, the bustling heart of Seaside Sweets, she was stunned by its success. She walked inside, her eyes wide, and asked a young employee if she could see the manager, Marcus. As she waited, she looked at the framed newspaper articles on the wall, celebrating the bakery's beloved founder. Her eyes landed on a large, smiling photograph of the owner. It was her mother. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. At that moment, Marcus walked out from the back, his face turning pale when he saw his wife. Before he could speak, Sarah emerged from her office, having been told a visitor was asking for Marcus. The three of them stood frozen in a triangle of shock, betrayal, and dawning horror. Clara's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and a sudden, ugly surge of avarice. "Mother, you have all this?" Her voice was a shrill accusation. "This should be mine." Sarah looked at her daughter, at the raw greed so nakedly displayed on her face, and a profound sadness washed over her. There was no remorse, no love, only entitlement. She turned her gaze to Marcus, who looked at the floor in shame, and then back to the daughter, who was a stranger to her. "This," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm, resonating with the weight of years of silent pain, "is what I built after you left me with nothing but a suitcase. This is the life I made for myself." She took a deep breath. "Marcus, you are fired." "And Clara," she said, her voice breaking for just a moment before steadying again, "you will get nothing. You made your choice all those years ago. Now you must live with it." With that, Sarah turned and walked back into her office, closing the door on the past and on the daughter who had traded a mother's love for a handful of coins, only to find herself left with nothing in the end. Friends, remember that although we sometimes think that getting rid of someone will bring us peace, in reality, all we're doing is losing love, loyalty, and support that money can't buy. This story reminds us that respect isn't measured by what someone occupies in the house, but by what they've silently given for years. And although the mother was able to get back on her feet and even give a job to the man whose wife and daughter had driven her from her home, the hardest lesson wasn't financial, it was emotional. Because money can be recovered, but trust, once broken, is rarely the same again. For a few coins, you can lose what's most valuable forever. If you enjoyed this beautiful story and reflection, don't forget to share it with anyone you think might find it useful. Like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos and new reflections for your life. See you in the next video. Bye.